When Robert Hayes started working as an apartment manager, all he wanted was a peaceful retirement. At 68, he was a quiet man who never spoke about his past to anyone. But that night at 2:30 a.m., sounds from the apartment building's basement would reveal a side of Robert that he had kept hidden for far too long. The apartment residents knew him only as a kind elderly man. They were about to learn the truth which shocked them all. Robert Hayes had been working at Riverside Apartments for 3 years when everyone had grown to love him. At 68, with gray hair and a calm demeanor, he was the kind of man everyone felt comfortable around. Always polite, always helpful, never causing trouble for anyone. He handled the building's small problems immediately, spoke kindly with residents, and tried never to be a burden to anyone. "Mr. Hayes is such a good man," said Mrs. Peterson from the 4th floor. "When my kitchen faucet broke, he came right up and fixed it. Never complained, never rushed through the job." The young couple Maria and Carlos on the 7th floor also loved Robert. "Even when the baby cries and neighbors complain, Robert always responds with understanding," Maria would say. "He's like our own grandfather." But no one knew Robert's background. Where he came from, what job he'd had before, why he'd started working at this apartment building. Robert always remained silent on these topics. "I just want a quiet life," he'd say, changing the subject. "Let the past stay in the past." Robert's daily routine was always the same. He'd arrive at the apartment at 7 a.m. and spend the day dealing with residents' problems. At 6 p.m., he'd start the night shift, ensuring the building's security until the next morning. He'd sit at the lobby desk, reading books or watching television. The apartment residents trusted him completely. Robert's presence made them feel safe. "When Mr. Hayes is here, we feel secure," said elderly Mr. Johnson from the 2nd floor. But no one really knew who Robert Hayes was. The building was a typical urban apartment complex, housing families from diverse backgrounds. Young professionals, elderly retirees, families with children, all found comfort in Robert's steady presence. He knew everyone's names, remembered their preferences, and seemed to genuinely care about their well-being. During his 3 years of service, Robert had become more than just a building manager. He was the person residents called when they were locked out, when they needed help moving furniture, or when they simply wanted someone to talk to. His small office in the lobby had become an unofficial community center where neighbors would stop by for coffee and conversation. "Mr. Hayes makes this place feel like home," Carlos often told his wife. "I've lived in a lot of buildings, but I've never felt this safe and welcome anywhere else." Robert appreciated the trust residents placed in him, but he was careful to maintain professional boundaries. He was friendly but never shared personal details. When asked about his life before the apartment, he'd deflect with humor or simply change the subject. What the residents didn't know was that Robert's calm demeanor came from years of training and discipline that had nothing to do with apartment management. That Tuesday night started like any other. Robert sat at the lobby desk reading a newspaper. The apartment was quiet, most residents were asleep. At 2:30 a.m., Robert went to the kitchen to take a coffee break. Returning from the kitchen to the lobby, he heard a strange sound. From the apartment building's basement came a metallic noise, like someone trying to pick a lock. Robert stopped and listened. The sound continued. Someone was trying to enter through the building's basement entrance. In that instant, Robert's entire body language changed. His shoulders tensed, his posture straightened, his eyes sharpened. The kind elderly man that apartment residents had known for 3 years suddenly transformed into someone else entirely. He quietly went to the security desk and opened the drawer. Inside were the building's spare keys, simple repair tools, and a small flashlight. Robert took the flashlight and silenced his movements. He moved silently toward the stairs leading to the basement. As he moved, he made no footsteps, as if he wasn't touching the ground. This was a habit ingrained by 30 years of Army Ranger training. He stopped at the top of the stairs and listened down below. Now the sound was clearer. There were 3 of them. They were trying to unlock the empty storage unit in the basement. "Damn it, this lock is too strong," said one voice. "Stay calm, Marcus." "Give me another minute," said another voice. "Hurry up. There's only one old security guard in this building, but let's still be careful." Robert waited silently on the stairs. He was assessing the enemy's numbers, positions, and intentions. 3 people, probably unarmed, they knew the building's layout somewhat. They might be planning to start with the empty unit and then move to other apartments. 30 years ago, Robert Hayes had faced similar situations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Behind enemy lines, alone, forced to fight against numerically superior enemies. This was familiar territory for him. But now what he had to protect wasn't just himself. There were families sleeping upstairs. Mrs. Peterson, Maria, and Carlos with their baby, Mr. Johnson. They were Robert's responsibility. The techniques he'd learned during his years in special operations began flooding back. How to move in darkness, how to assess multiple threats, how to neutralize enemies without alerting others. These weren't just memories, they were muscle memory, instincts that had kept him alive through countless dangerous missions. Robert realized this wasn't just about stopping a burglary. These men were threatening the safety of people he'd sworn to protect. In his mind, the apartment building had become his area of operations, and these intruders were hostile forces that needed to be neutralized. The burglars finally managed to unlock the storage unit door. "There we go. Get inside, let's quickly take whatever's here. Then we'll go upstairs, right?" Of course. Rich people live in this building. Jewelry, money, valuable items. Robert had heard enough. This wasn't just a storage robbery. These men were targeting the apartment residents. He quietly descended the stairs. The stealth techniques he'd learned during Army Ranger training kicked in. Moving in darkness, making no sound, approaching the enemy undetected. These were skills Robert had perfected over many years. When he reached the basement corridor, he saw the 3 burglars inside the storage unit. They were searching for valuable items with their flashlights. Robert quietly approached the electrical panel on the opposite side of the corridor. He knew the building's electrical system very well. With one move, he could cut the basement's lights. The moment he touched the electrical switch, the basement plunged into complete darkness. "What's happening?" shouted one of the burglars. "Power's out. Is this normal?" "I don't know, but let's get out of here. This isn't good." Darkness was Robert's advantage. For 30 years, he'd operated in night missions. Moving in darkness was a natural skill for him. While the burglars searched for an exit with their flashlights, Robert quietly approached. His first target was the tall man who seemed to be the group's leader. "Marcus, where are you?" called one of them. "I'm here, stay calm. We'll find the exit." When Robert got close enough behind Marcus, he moved. He wrapped his left arm around Marcus's neck, cutting off his air supply, while taking the flashlight with his right hand. Marcus lost consciousness before he could understand what was happening. The second burglar panicked when his friend didn't respond. "Marcus. Marcus, answer me." After quietly laying Marcus on the ground, Robert focused on the second target. This man was smaller in build and trembling with fear. "Who's there?" the second burglar shouted. Robert didn't answer. He quietly approached and applied the same technique. The second man also lost consciousness. The third burglar was now truly panicked. "Marcus. Tony. What's going on? I'm getting out of here." But he couldn't find the exit door. In the darkness, he was trying to illuminate the area with his flashlight, but his sense of direction was lost. Robert quietly approached the last burglar. But this time he used a different approach. "Stop," he said in a deep voice. The third burglar froze. The voice came from behind him. Who are you?" "I am this building's protector," Robert said in a calm but stern voice. "And you don't belong here." The burglar tried to turn, but Robert's hand touched his shoulder. "Don't move. If you don't want to pass out like your friends, listen to me." Okay. I'll do whatever you want. I'm calling the police. You and your friends will stay here. If you try to escape, you'll face the consequences." After neutralizing the third burglar, Robert went to the electrical panel and turned the lights back on. When the basement corridor was illuminated, 3 burglars lay on the ground. Marcus and Tony were unconscious, while the third sat trembling in the corner with fear. Robert picked up the phone at the lobby desk and called the police. 911, emergency line. This is Robert Hayes, manager of Riverside Apartments. 3 burglars entered our building. I've neutralized them. Could you send police and ambulance? Did you say neutralize them, sir? Yes. They're currently in the basement, under control. Police and ambulance arrived within 15 minutes. Officer Sarah Collins was surprised by what she found when she arrived at the scene. 3 burglars sat in the basement with their hands bound by plastic zip ties. Robert Hayes was calmly waiting beside them. "Mr. Hayes, how did you capture these men?" asked Officer Collins. "They entered the apartment without permission. I brought the situation under control. But you? I mean, there are 3 of them. And you're? I'm 68 years old, yes. But protecting the apartment residents is my duty." When Officer Collins checked Robert's file, she was surprised. There was no record of any previous military service. At least not in the visible files. But she couldn't help wondering how Robert had single-handedly neutralized these 3 burglars. The burglars themselves were in shock. Marcus, the leader, kept shaking his head. "I don't understand what happened," he told the police. "We were in the storage room, then everything went dark, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up with my hands tied." Tony, the second burglar, was equally confused. There was this voice in the darkness, like it came from everywhere at once. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. The third burglar, still trembling, told police, "He moved like a ghost. I never saw him coming. One moment I was alone, the next moment he was right behind me." Officer Collins made a note to investigate Robert's background more thoroughly. Something about this situation didn't add up. A 68-year-old apartment manager doesn't typically possess the skills to neutralize 3 armed intruders with such efficiency. During the questioning, Robert remained calm and cooperative, but he volunteered no information beyond the basic facts of what had occurred. When asked about his methods, he simply said, "I did what was necessary to protect the residents." The police found no weapons on Robert, no evidence of excessive force used against the burglars. It was as if he had simply made them disappear in the darkness, then reappear as prisoners. The next morning, when the apartment residents learned what had happened, they couldn't believe it. "Mr. Hayes protected us," said Mrs. Peterson. "That kind elderly man. He captured 3 burglars by himself," asked Maria. Mr. Johnson was the most surprised. "I thought Mr. Hayes was just a polite man. Turns out he's our personal bodyguard." Robert came to work the next day as if nothing had happened. He went about the building's routine business just like always. But the apartment residents now looked at him with different eyes. There was a mixture of respect and curiosity. Who was Robert really? How had he single-handedly taken down 3 burglars? When Maria came down to the lobby with her baby, she wanted to thank Robert. "Mr. Hayes, thank you so much for what you did last night. If you hadn't been there." "It was my duty," Robert said simply. "The safety of apartment residents is my responsibility." "But how? I mean, there were 3 of them and..." Robert smiled. "Mrs. Maria, I just did my job. Nothing more." But Maria and the other residents were impressed by Robert's modesty. This man was a hero, but he refused to accept it. As weeks passed, the apartment residents became even more attached to Robert. They began to see him not just as a manager, but as a true protector. Mrs. Peterson would say, "When Mr. Hayes is here, I feel safe. He's not just a kind man, he's also a strong protector." Robert remained silent as always. He didn't talk about his past. But the apartment residents now knew he wasn't an ordinary elderly man. One evening, when Mr. Johnson was chatting with Robert, he gathered courage to ask, "Mr. Hayes, did you serve in the military in the past?" Robert remained silent for a while. Then he answered simply, "Yes, I did." "What kind of duties did you have?" "Various duties. But I'm retired now. My only job now is to protect the residents of this building." Mr. Johnson didn't ask further. He understood that Robert didn't want to give more information about his past. But for the apartment residents, this was enough. It didn't matter who Robert was. What mattered was that he protected them and made them feel safe. The building's atmosphere had changed completely. Residents walked with more confidence, knowing they had a guardian who possessed skills they were only beginning to understand. Children played more freely in the courtyard, and elderly residents felt secure leaving their apartments even late at night. Word of the incident spread beyond the building. Other apartment complexes in the neighborhood inquired about Robert's availability, offering higher salaries and better benefits. But Robert politely declined all offers. "This is my home now," he told Mrs. Peterson when she asked if he'd ever consider leaving. "These people are my responsibility." After that night, no security problems occurred at Riverside Apartments. It was as if all potential criminals had learned that the building had a special protector. Robert Hayes continued his quiet retirement as always. But now the apartment residents knew he wasn't just a kind elderly man. He was a protector who could transform into a warrior when necessary. And this allowed everyone to sleep better. Months later, when a reporter from the local newspaper heard about the incident and came to interview Robert, he found a man who was reluctant to discuss his past but passionate about his present responsibilities. "Mr. Hayes, residents describe you as a hero. How do you respond to that?" Robert considered the question carefully. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who takes his responsibilities seriously. These people trust me to keep them safe, and I won't let them down. But your methods were quite unusual for a building manager." Robert smiled slightly. "Everyone has skills from their past. The important thing is how you use those skills to help others." The reporter pressed for more details about his military background, but Robert deflected skillfully. "What matters isn't what I did before, but what I do now. Every day, I have the privilege of protecting good people who've welcomed me into their community." Mrs. Peterson, who had agreed to be interviewed, had tears in her eyes as she spoke about Robert. "He's not just our building manager. He's our guardian angel. We don't know what his past holds, but we know what his heart holds, genuine care for all of us." The article, when published, was titled "The Guardian of Riverside Apartments." It spoke of an unassuming man whose quiet strength and mysterious past had become legendary among residents, but who preferred to let his actions speak louder than his words. Robert framed the article and hung it in his small office, not out of pride, but as a reminder of the trust placed in him. Every time he looked at it, he remembered why he had chosen this life, not to escape his past, but to find purpose in protecting others. Years later, when Robert eventually retired from the building, the residents threw him a farewell party that became neighborhood legend. During his speech, he finally shared a small piece of his past. 30 years ago, I learned that the greatest honor isn't in the battles you win, but in the people you protect. You've given an old soldier the greatest gift, a chance to serve in peacetime, to use strength for protection rather than destruction." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Robert's successor found an apartment complex that ran like clockwork, residents who looked out for each other, and a security system that went far beyond cameras and locks. It was built on trust, respect, and the legacy of a man who proved that heroes don't retire, they just find new ways to serve. And sometimes, late at night when the building was quiet, residents would remember that reassuring presence at the front desk and sleep a little more soundly, knowing that some protectors never truly leave their post. Don't forget to subscribe to Heart Animal Stories for more incredible true stories that celebrate courage, hidden strength, and the everyday heroes who protect us in ways we never imagine. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that could change how you see the people around you.